Okay, my name is Kristen Dooley. I am Director of Women Against Military Madness. And welcome to our open, freewheeling discussion about Russia and Putin. Penny is going to start us off.
Yes, well.
To tell you sort of why we're doing this.
Am I?
Well,
I was going to do the membership.
well, that's it. That's it.
This is sponsored by the membership committee. So, and we've been this summer at most of the events. We have been encouraging people to become members of WHAM if they are not, because we really value people's input into the organization. We're a forum that people can be as active or as they wish. And we just hope that you know that by supporting WHAM, you're supporting an organization that stands up to war and injustice and keeps the hope of peace alive for the present and future generations. So if anyone is not a member of WHAM in this group, if you wish to become a member, we have a special, and it's a $20 membership instead of the regular $40 membership. And I'll be happy to accommodate, take your information, and just see me after the event.
And also, we did this right after the election in 2016, and 50 people showed up. It was the night after, and everyone was morose. And so we thought, we're trying to find issues that people kind of may take a stand on and be emotionally involved in. And Russiagate seems to be one. We're constantly hit with it in the media. But you have to kind of go online, but there is a whole section of the population that doesn't buy it for varying reasons. And so we thought, oh, well, this might be kind of interesting to just talk about in a civil manner with each other about, some of us probably know a lot of the debunking things, but you hear it all the time. For instance, as I pulled up today, I heard, in the 17 intelligence agencies that supported the Obama administration report that the Russians had hacked into our elections. Right off the bat, that is a lie, but you can, even in the New York Times, find a tiny little correction somewhere on the correction page that, oh yeah, well, it was 3. Even some of the major ones refused to because they couldn't prove it. So they said, we can't put our name to this. But the CIA, the NSA, and what's the other one? CIA, NSA, and FBI? Yeah, I guess it was it.
Defense Intelligence?
No, they refused to.
Okay.
The DIA, and that's big. That's gigantic in the government, and they said, no, we will not support this. But
support national intelligence.
They don't support the idea that the Russians
the report that the Russians had.
Before we let people discuss further,
Okay.
Sarah,
Okay.
Can we go around and people introduce themselves and maybe say what group you're from or something? Like I said,
Or why you're not watching the debates.
And if you don't
Why you came here instead of the
somebody
debates.
don't pass. My name is Kristen Dooley and I'm with WHAM.
My name is Mike Madden, and I am the next member of WHAM.
Oh, good! We got a new member.
Bill Adamski, WHAM.
Ava Rudnicki, new member of WHAM.
Oh, great.
I'm Lucia Smith, and I'm connected to WHAM. Yeah.
My name is Linda Van Art. I just moved to Minneapolis in December, and I've admired WHAM, but I was always concerned that that WHAM was not involved in decreasing the chance of nuclear war, and that we can. I was involved in the nuclear freeze in 1982 for about 2 years, and that did affect Ronald Reagan, and he did meet with Andropov and then Gorbachev, and they considerably reduced the chance of nuclear war. And Caspar Weinberger, who was his
I'm
Secretary
gonna
of
stop you.
Defense.
So-
Okay,
Did
I'm
you
sorry.
save that for the
Okay.
discussion period?
Anyway, I want to join WHAM, but if it's not going to work on this.
Oh, it is,
It
totally.
always, we do, yeah.
Totally. Abolish
I'm
it.
Gail Hughes, I'm with the Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers on the leadership team. And I also, I'm the delegate from CGS, Citizens for Global Solutions with MAP. And I'm a member of the Minnesota Peace Project as well. And the Minnesota Peace Initiative, which is a new organization.
Okay.
And Wham, did I hear Wham?
She just showed up.
I attend a lot of WHAM events.
I'm Margaret Esslinger. I'm from a lot of peace organizations. I started with Middle East Peace Now after I had taken a trip in 1994 to Israel as guests of Palestinians, and I haven't been the same since.
I'm Heidi, I'm a bridge person.
I'm Sarah Olson, I'm on the WHAM membership committee.
I'm Penny Gardner, I'm on the WHAM membership committee.
I'm Kathleen Ruan, I'm a member of WHAM, Ruana, I should say.
The what?
Kathleen Ruana, and a member of WHAM.
Okay. Sarah Martin, member of WHAM on the membership committee.
Don Olson, I'm a member of WHAM, and I do a public affairs program on KFAI, my good son.
A great one.
Yes,
you
it's
invisible?
wonderful.
I'm invisible, yes, but I'm the videographer, Carla.
Okay, I ran out a couple of things, and one is just an outline map of Russia, and I thought this was interesting. It was very hard to find an outline map of Russia that had this little point here, this little high hand up there, that's Crimea. And on the internet, you do not get Crimea as being part of the Russia, even though it is. They voted to be part of Russia.
Yes, they did.
So when I found, but I said, well, we should do a map of comparing the US to Russia. I could not find a map of Russia that included little tiny Crimea. But this is a map that shows that Russia is about 2 times the size of the United States. And then I also tried to find a pretty general fact sheet, and this is from the Danish embassy. Oh no, the Indian embassy in Russia. That kind of talks about the capital is, the area is, whatever. So I can pass those around for people to see. Like I said, when we did the election discussion in 2016, WHAM didn't have and cannot have, because of our 501(c)(3) status, we cannot have an opinion on who to elect. So it was no requirement that anybody in WHAM, believe in a certain candidate. And that was a time when we could all talk about it. WHAM also does not have a position on either Russia or Putin. And that's why we welcome people coming together, like-minded people here, and nobody's opinion is wrong. I want you to feel free to say what you think, but I don't think you're going to convince other people here today that your position is right or wrong, but I do want you to feel okay to voice it. So, anyway, do you want to continue what you were saying?
I'm really sorry.
No.
It's okay.
Well, I know that an awful lot of people don't like President Trump, and I didn't vote for him. I'm not a supporter of Trump. But it has bothered me terribly that diplomacy, if it's done by him, has been criminalized. And every other president has felt that they need to work with Russia, even when they were shooting down our spy planes, or we were coming into conflict in third world countries with communists. I mean, the president was allowed to meet with communists, but Trump is not allowed to meet with Putin. And I was just shocked. I look at New York Times every morning for free on the internet. And one time, they had an animated cartoon, I don't know, above the fold of Putin and Trump riding naked on something like a unicorn. And they were kissing, and one of them was squeezing the other guy's nipple. And they had,
Oh my God.
this was in the New York Times, this is news. And it was beyond belief. You can still Google it, I imagine, animated cartoon of Putin and Trump.
So what you're talking about is the way the mainstream press attacks Trump when he tries to meet with Putin, right?
But it's not true that Trump has not met with the Putin.
No, when he did meet with Putin, this was what happened after Helsinki.
Yeah.
And they refer to it, their contact as a bromance, and I've seen all kinds of pornographic references to what goes on, I mean, in mainstream media, between the two heads of state that have the most nuclear weapons. And there is a mental illness, I think, in our country.
Well, we have a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions, and they won't always agree with you. But if we want to take off from what you're talking about, the Trump administration has accused Russia of being in violation of one of the treaties that was signed for this intermediate range missiles, which they denied. And I saw it on the television. They took people to a rather odd place to show this missile in some schoolhouse somewhere. But they gave some amount of time for Russia to get back in compliance. Otherwise, the U.S. under Trump would then start to produce these intermediate range missiles. These are the ones, I believe, the ones that can easily hit Western Europe, and which were a very big factor in the 1980s for all the people in Europe, Western Europe, that demonstrated against it.
I'm just, I'm thinking in terms of WHAM, and we've mentioned the membership committee the membership conversation that we had after the last election, and that was it was right after the election, the night, and or the next night.
The next night after the election.
After the election. And it was so people could just kind of get together and,
Vent.
Vent, yeah. And I think the thing about WHAM that I appreciate is that it's quite broad. I mean, there are people along a spectrum of peace and justice beliefs, pro-peace, pro-justice, but, and WHAM doesn't have set and specific policy statements generally about much of anything. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of specific policy statements. Regarding the Putin-Trump meetings or conversations they've had, the thing I think that bothers me about one in particular was that they had it just together with a couple of translators, I believe, or interpreters. And usually the administrations have other people with the president involved in the conversations, so that it's an administration decisions and perspectives that come out of it rather than just the one guy.
I was going to say that actually the demonization of Putin and Russia started during the Obama administration, and it's under Hillary Clinton, remember all the Ukrainian stuff. So it's everything with Trump is just to a new level, but there's really no new ground being. I don't see any real new ground being tilled at all. And of course it fits in so nicely with, I mean, the New York Times is really bad that Hillary lost, I guess. They just can't get over it, but it's such a nice distraction. I mean, I
didn't
wonder if
watch
the immigration's even gonna come up in the debates tonight. I mean, it's this focus on Putin and Russia, and Russiagate is just, it's just what? What kind of hole is that? A black hole. It's giving a black hole a bad name, actually, 'cause,
This is the Benghazi for the Democrats,
Yeah.
really.
Oh, that's
just
right.
Spending
It
all
is.
that
Yeah.
money.
They don't,
Yeah.
For
maybe that's where they
just
got
to-
the idea.
Yeah, just the whirlpool that's
yeah.
continuously.
Do you wanna introduce yourself, just?
Oh, I'm Mary Whites. I've done things, okay, but I'm off and on. I've been so concerned, and I never found the answer to this question. Mark Zuckerberg sold 87 million people's private information to Cambridge Analytica, a British foreign power. I never have found out how much money he got. Recently, he was fined $5 billion, but he's worth more than 580 billion, so that's nothing.
What?
Yes, and 87, and they trolled this private information for Trump supporters. So the Russians have nothing on Zuckerberg, and he's called into Congress, and they treat him like some celebrity. And this has been bugging me for ages, and nobody seems to know what the answer is to.
Are you saying our elections are corrupted
By Facebook.
by things other than Russia?
Oh, yeah, like Adelson, you know, there's
Well,
this
voting
stuff coming out
machines,
about
you know, whatever.
Adelson, you know, and all the millions that the Adelsons put into the election for Republicans and Trump, because their issue is Israel. And, you know, that's not taking a stand either way. It's like, does anybody care about that? Maybe $100 million from an incredibly wealthy oligarch went into that election. We're not even talking the Kochs, and they did the same thing. And it's like, this is what happens to our elections, and we're blaming Russia. You know, and furthermore, it's so demonized. That's how our propaganda works. Look at what a monster Saddam Hussein was. Nobody would even believe that he had denuclearized, and then a bunch of people lied. You know, so it's just that we're so propagandized, and with this issue, we have to explain that A, we're not taking a stand in Israel. B, we don't support Trump before we say anything about the propaganda, which is beyond these two issues. It's like and then if you say anything in the mainstream media with your name attached, then you get demonized for believing anything opposite the publicity they put out about whatever their current propaganda is, you know. And that's certainly happened with this Russia question.
Yeah, there's a huge disparity in, you know, like what are the chances you'll be killed by a terrorist as opposed to what are the chances you'll be killed in a traffic accident or something. You know, the things you should be scared of are all out of proportion to what we need. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Well, one thing that bothers me is how Putin has befriended Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Salman. That's something that's disturbing. But one thing that Clinton would have done if she had won is go after Putin and Russia, and I don't like that. But there are a lot of things I just don't know about Russia. Has that stuff gone around?
It's coming.
Oh.
But I'm reading it.
You'll know everything you wanna know about
Well,
Russia.
no, I won't. I don't have my glasses with me, and I
Okay.
can't see. Anyway, Sarah, when you talk about the money that's run into our election system is shitty.
Yeah.
You know, when Trump said, what did he say about the election is rigged? Our election system is rigged. The way it runs across states, the fact that, and for this I agree with Brad Friedman on the broadcast, that everyone should be voting on paper ballots. And when you put them in the machines, which could be iffy, make sure that they count a number of the ballots to make sure that they've gone through correctly.
We have
But-
them in Minnesota.
We do.
Paper ballots.
Yes.
Minnesota does that, but not every state does.
Right.
Georgia, I was listening to the broadcast this morning, and Georgia destroyed evidence from the last election, even though they were told not to by a judge. I mean, there's
What
no
was
shame, and they're ordering the same
Georgia.
unverifiable machines that they had the last time.
Yeah, there have been a couple of elections that have been overturned with
Let's
flipping
go
the
back,
votes.
let's bring it back to Putin and Russia. if we can. I'm sorry.
This has a Russia tie, but it's also about elections. Remember the Alabama Senate race
Yeah.
with Roy Moore and I forget who the Democrat was, Jones. There was a write-in candidate that was opposing Moore in the Republican primary, and this company, New Knowledge, have you heard of them? They're run by some Democratic operatives. They went to work on that election and they started spreading a lot of false, fake information around. They tried to get Republicans to vote for the write-in candidate, and they amplified that with bots and stuff like that. And then they had some other disinformation that they put out, and they tried to make it look like it was supplied by Russians. They used Cyrillic and other identifying markers so that it might be Russia. Well, they were discovered, meddling in this American election, and they're Americans too. And they had the audacity to say, well, it was just this experiment we were doing. We wanted to do it on a level where it really didn't affect the outcome of the election, but we wanted to do this experiment.
To see if we can do it again.
And then the mainstream media continues to turn to New Knowledge as experts in detecting intrusion and all this stuff.
And they're thieves.
And the Russian tie-in, the New York Times reported on this meddling as Russia-like tactics.
Yeah,
That's right.
What are we going to do?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I'm pleased to see that, there are other people like me who, I'm concerned that what is happening is there's an attempt to demonize Russia. The US has a bad guy, a series of bad guys, and it's always to try to have a run up to war.
That's right.
And so I'm worried that that's what's happening. And what you were saying, Kathleen, about how Hillary was planning to attack Russia or something. I mean, I read Manifest Destiny by William Engdahl, and I mean, I understand about that the U.S. overthrows governments and things like that, but this was jaw-dropping, even for me. I don't know if you're familiar with William Engdahl in Manifest Destiny, but he essentially said that, I made copies for everybody of The Rape of Russia, the CIA's Yeltsin coup d'etat. He says, are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm with the coup d'etat, the Yeltsin thing.
Yeah, well, so what happened is the U.S. attacked Russia economically.
Yes.
And, it interference with elections. The U.S. interfered with Russian elections to get Yeltsin in power. He was a puppet who then could allow the plunder of Russia by Russian oligarchs
And
who were
American
bribed-
oligarchs.
and Americans,
were in there.
right. And then guess who put a stop to it? Putin.
That's why he was a
So
hero.
that's why the U.S. doesn't like Putin. And Hillary Clinton, the Clintons were involved in this, so there was a personal thing even.
Right.
Where Putin doesn't like Hillary for good reason, because of the plunder of his country. And Hillary doesn't like Putin because Putin put a stop to it. And so there is really, I think there was a danger that there's this other chapter. I have two chapters, the excerpts from two chapters I'm going to give you. The second chapter is called Cold War not ended, and you mentioned about nuclear war. Well, there's some people in the US military who have this crazy idea, and it's truly crazy, that if we can have a defense system that's better than Russia or whoever, then we won't have we're wasting our nuclear weapons.
Right.
We can't use them.
Yeah.
But if we have a first strike, we'll have a first strike capability if we have a defense system that's better than the other guy. And it sounded like he thought that Hillary was actually planning to
That's
do
what
that.
Colleen Raleigh
Had she
said.
won.
She's our committee tackling torture. At the top, it's about the torture issue that surfaced under the second Bush administration. But she said in government that people really believe that you can have kind of a low-level nuclear war, and it won't lead to total destruction, and they're pushing for it.
And so then
Just
Russia
in
would
case
try to
anybody
respond.
thinks WHAM is against nuclear war.
We're
We do
absolutely
actually take that
Right.
position, that's true.
But they would think
I said we were
that
pretty
nothing-
vague, but on that one.
You don't want it.
The estimate is that the US, there would be a lot of Americans who would be killed, but the US would win because there would still be.
Yeah, no, they
as
have
many-
these-
I mean, this
Yes.
is what we're up against.
Yes.
And most Americans seem to believe, and most progressives seem to believe this. Putin's a bad guy, Russia's a bad guy.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that there are a few out there who are
Well, can I
not
just mention
susceptible
for
to
the
that.
few who maybe don't know about it, because one of our members had sent a Jimmy Dore show, he's a comedian, and he was interviewing about the Mueller hearing, Aaron Mate, and Aaron Mate said that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State under Obama, Bill Clinton gave one of his most remunerative speeches, $500,000 for speaking to a Russian bank that was sanctioned by the State Department under his wife.
Oh, geez.
Putin called Bill Clinton and said, "Thank you for doing this." And after he got the money, her State Department started agitating for lifting sanctions on that bank. And during her campaign in 2016, Bloomberg News was going to come out with a story about this speech and the amount of money he got, and the Clinton campaign was able to suppress it, and they were going around saying, "Victory!" kept it down. And so does that mean Bill Clinton's a collaborator? Well, that's a stupid question to ask, but look, if Trump had done that, oh my God, if any candidate for president, even if it's William Weld, who won't have a chance against Trump. Anybody, they would be, they'd just be raked across the coals in the mainstream media. Imagine, that was one of the highest tickets he ever spoke for. Just that amount of money was, he didn't usually get that much, more like
Sarah, this is a
350,000.
distraction, but there's liquid flowing
Oh,
over
yes.
the paper.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yes.
So I find this a very scary situation.
Yeah, it just goes to show how propagandized we are, that something like that can happen. It doesn't even get mentioned, but you see a cartoon above the banner of the New York Times, which should have reported something like that.
Yeah.
People know, it's not like, maybe I didn't know. Everybody in government probably knows, and yet you get these horrible cartoons,
I looked at the Union of Concerned Scientists today, and they said the number one threat to humanity is nuclear war. And number two is global warming, which is sort of the opposite of nuclear winter. But we're so worried about global warming.
No, you're right.
But I have had nightmares about nuclear winter because I don't get off on darkness and cold. And it's hard to roast.
We'll die.
Yeah. That's hard.
But I have friends who would call themselves liberal and progressive, but they say things like, nobody wants nuclear war. But here we have $1 million, under Obama, there was $1 trillion upgrade in our nuclear weapons over the next 10 years. And it's still, I guess it's still in the works, it's still going on.
Kathleen, did you want to?
I just want to explain, the thing is that Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Women Against Military Madness, and Veterans for Peace are all groups across the globe that are, we're signing petitions to make sure to ban nuclear weapons. Not that it's gonna happen anytime soon. And if 50 countries sign the treaty, it will be law in the United States, or in the world, I'm not sure.
For what it's worth.
Yeah, right.
So that's one thing we're.
Israel won't sign it.
I think 50 countries have signed, haven't 87?
I think they have to pass it in their legislative body.
Oh,
They have to
okay,
ratify
I've
it.
signed it,
Ratify
I've signed it,
it.
but not passed it.
122, yeah, it has to be ratified, and it's still less than 50 countries.
Okay.
Well, do we want to take some of these things here?
Sure.
Did Russia interfere with the election, and did it make a difference if they did? And if Russia did do it, were they justified in doing it? How about, and I'll tell you why I think that.
You answer first.
Well, the reason I think that is because,
You think what, that they're justified?
yes, it's a
Think
sort
they interfered?
because Hillary was actually the one that we're talking about here, was pushing for the idea of nuclear war in Eastern Europe, that it could be contained, all her big thinkers were, and that this was, you could see, well, they wouldn't want her to be in there.
Yeah.
And so that they would work against it, because she was, she with her husband, when he was president, they've all moved the borders of NATO right up to the edge of Russia.
Right, yeah.
Even though there was a
treaty, yeah.
promise, no, it was a promise.
Yeah.
And the State Department has said, well, it wasn't a treaty, it wasn't written down, so what's the big deal?
Not ratified.
But the point of it is that, so they brought up missiles right up to the edge of the Soviet Union. Why you need missiles in Poland to stop missiles that might be coming from Iran? How do you do that? So I would say, if they were trying to do that, well, here that they would like the other candidate, because Hillary might have been more prone to actually follow through on the things she was talking about and her entourage was talking about.
Did Hillary openly advocate for nuclear war?
I don't think so.
I don't think she said that, but a lot of the people that she had, as I recall it, in her entourage, and I couldn't prove it by where I was reading it, but that's the sense that I have of that period, and just listening to things.
She was blaming Russia.
Advocate for a no-fly zone in Syria when the
Right.
Russians had their
They were
warplanes
provocative.
bombing ISIS. And in order to enforce a no-fly zone, we would have had to shoot down a Russian plane, at least one.
So is there actual evidence for interference in the election?
It's not by the Russian government as far as
Okay.
I know.
But if they did, did it make a difference?
It makes, yeah.
Well,
No,
that's-
it
right,
probably
that's the question.
didn't.
Zuckerberg
This
made
Cambridge
a difference.
Analytica thing
Yeah,
probably did
Zuckerberg.
more harm.
And we have interfered in so many elections, it's plus
Oh, yeah.
100
Yes, but
in the
let's
world.
take
We have
this one.
taken out
Well, isn't it
Democratic
80,000
elected people.
Facebook entries or something by probably not the government? 80,000, and how many are there? How many billions are there?
Plus,
So
a
the
lot of them were done
87
after
million.
the election.
Right.
87
So the
million.
chances of anybody seeing even one of these things is,
Plus, they targeted all
getting
kinds
killed by
of
a
people,
terrorist is
Yes,
more.
not just
And how much money
anti-Hillary.
did he get for this? Does anybody know?
no.
Well, some of one of the main things they've said is that they would try to amplify people who are on both sides of the debate. Like, they would amplify support for Black Lives Matter,
Yeah, that's right.
and they would amplify other things too, just to create uncertainty or maybe chaos. Well, they might have done that.
Well, who remembers when Philandro Castile was murdered and we were having demonstrations And there was a demonstration called by a group none of us had ever heard of. And it was called for to appear in St. Paul. And whatever, and I remember Michelle and the
Communities.
Thank you.
Communities United.
That they had to get in touch with these people who were saying, you're having it in the wrong place. And it turns out these were pretty fishy people. And so the local group said, well, no, we're not gonna have it there, but it's a good date and we'll have it in St. Anthony Park, or whatever village it should have been in.
Yeah.
But that may have been an attempt to, stir up, as if we weren't pissed that Philando Castile was murdered. But that may have been an attempt of somebody making an event that, with no history of, being an activist group, just to try and stir up trouble. So first of all, it's false because there was already trouble. This guy a cop killed somebody. So that trouble did not have to be stirred up. It did not have to be brought to us by a Russian bot. We actually figured that out all on our little individual selves, that was a bad thing. And we were able to protest it without the help of some little Russian bot. So the logic behind this that is just so flawed, and so basically, you have to be so cynical to some extent to think that that would be a successful technique, is to, well, let's just stir up trouble. As if black lives didn't need to matter, as if, honest to God, real life individual people weren't in the streets protesting it. But so part of that is that I think it appeals to a certain cynicism that they want us to have as citizens. Well, I can't do anything, I don't do anything. So you don't believe that anybody would be motivated except for some foreign interference, putting the crazy idea in our head that we should get up and protest. That whole logic behind it, to me, is so flawed. And I don't know where I'm going with that. I don't know if somebody wants to follow through on that, but the whole idea that Russians, that we would be a perfectly happy country, we would all work together if only Russians hadn't put these crazy ideas in our heads,
Right. Yeah, I'm with Mary on this, You can take the totality of what Russia is alleged to have done, that they hacked the Podesta emails and the DNC emails, and then they gave them to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks published them, and then there was the Internet Research Agency that had a budget of, $14 million a year, and they posted ads, and they had a bunch of bots that were commenting on this site and that site. You take all of that, put it all together, it's peanuts compared to what the United States does everywhere and anywhere at once in the world, with a budget that's thousands of times greater than what that Internet Research Agency had. It's just, I can't believe that such a large segment of the public has fallen for this Russian meddling stuff. It's just ridiculous.
That's Hillary.
And Noam Chomsky said on Democracy Now! That the obsession with the Russian Internet
Research
Agency and all the attempts by Russian operatives to meddle in the election is ignoring that there's a lot of domestic similar mischief going on.
New knowledge.
By groups in this country. And Iran is also getting into, as well as China, getting into the same sort of, let's put it this way, Russia does not have an exclusive hold on doing subversion on our electoral system through the internet and other means.
I think I read just recently, maybe in the last 2 weeks, that a woman judge, like Gebni or Lebni, something like that,
I know what
told
you're gonna say.
Mr. Mueller that
Yes.
he would be sanctioned if he ever again said, connected the, what is it, the IRA,
IRA.
yeah, with the Russian government. If he ever conflated meddling with the government, he's not allowed to do that. And they said, well, the sanctioning might just be a fine of $500 or something, but he's
But
not.
that's because the people that were indicted, their parent company, Concord Management, owned by a Russian oligarch, actually the month after they were indicted, came with a team of lawyers to Washington DC and said, okay, we're gonna confront the charges. And so they tried to with the Mueller people, and they said, we can't show you the evidence because it's all national security. And the judge said, then you can't do that.
Right.
You know, people have a right to see the evidence against them, their representation. You can't just indict people. Okay, yeah, it happens. People get secretly indicted, but you know, it's that you have to be able to see the evidence, you know, eventually.
Regarding the 2016 election, Hillary won by 3 million votes, they say. But there were 3 states that were very questionable. And Hillary threw in the towel, like Al Gore threw in the towel, though he won Florida. But she could raise $6 million in a really short time to recount Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So they started in Wisconsin, and 2 women went around and found out that Hillary actually won Wisconsin. But this was kind of, then they all once the tide was turning, it's like they shut down.
They shut down the recount.
Those 3 states, which were the 3 states that were very questionable. And I don't know why Hillary wanted to blame the Russians, but.
Actually, if you remember correctly.
That was Jill Stein, Green Party candidate.
Jill Stein.
Yeah.
Jill Stein.
I gave money to Jill Stein's
Recount
effort, and she
Yeah.
did get authorization with enough money to have the recount done. in
She had enough
Wisconsin.
money, they shut
But
her
didn't a
down.
few of the
Republican
counties
Party
refuse
shut
to
her
give
down.
her the
Yes.
votes?
That was true
So they
too.
couldn't do a true recount
Yeah, they
because
didn't.
they
They
wouldn't
didn't.
let them
But
have it.
those
ended
2
up-
women went throughout Wisconsin, even though they were stopped, and Wisconsin went Hillary.
See, that's one thing, that's a huge question, like, why didn't they take, was it they wanted, why'd they hate Jill Stein so much? Oh, I know she was part of their
'cause she's
thing, but you
a
know, the thing
spoiler.
is, what if she could have won a few extra votes,
Well,
you
look
know?
did Hillary run against Trump or did she run against Bernie? She did everything,
Yeah.
including dirty tricks. Donna Brazile got fired.
I know.
It was one dirty trick after another.
And vote
They didn't
stealing.
even count California,
I
and that
know.
would have gone
Oh,
for
and
Bernie.
The House Democrat from Florida, who was head of the Democratic National Committee, she ended up getting kicked
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Debbie
Wasserman.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz
She was
and
just
Donna
a blatant
Brazile.
Hillary.
Oh. And she was in the
Oh,
Florida mess too,
Yeah.
Debbie Washington.
You know, they
Schultz.
scheduled things like debates between her and Bernie, like on a Saturday night.
Or
And
Thursday.
don't forget super delegates.
Yes.
All the
Yeah.
super delegates.
Yeah.
Well, they were all in the bag before it started.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's it, you know, and still, we were told Clinton was gonna be the president. And really, I remember sitting there, I was watching the Democracy Now! Coverage that night, and one of my daughters came to the house, and I turned to her, I said, I can't fucking believe that she's gonna lose to Trump. I was shocked. I still didn't think he had a chance, you know,
Yeah.
because you even, whether you think it's fixed or whatever, you know, you believe that.
a
And
month ago-
I think she did win the popular vote. And I think that what tipped it for Trump was not the Republican Party supporting Trump. They just have this wonderful apparatus they've put in place for the last 20 years to steal and suppress votes. And it went to work.
Well, also,
And-
the blacks didn't turn out for Hillary. I just read that the black turnout in
Right.
2016 was 7% less
Yeah.
than in 2012.
But white women turned out for Trump.
54%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know if more came to vote. There's a difference between not voting for Hillary and voting for Trump versus a bunch of people literally not showing up.
Yeah, you had
And I heard interviews with black
You had two
people who
candidates that
said,
nobody wanted to vote for.
Wow.
And the bottom line is, Hillary got 65 million votes, the same number of votes, approximately, with give or take a few 100,000, that Obama won with in 12.
Is that right?
Let's go back to, go ahead.
I'm making a tangential comment, not about the election, but about the surveillance and the propaganda state. And I would just recommend highly to anybody who can stomach it, Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine. He makes a fantastic, kind of minute by minute almost, case for the internet was started hugely by the United States government to manipulate populations, and he gives, it started off more in different countries where they manipulated various factions of, I can't even remember the countries at the moment, but I think that's what's kind of interesting about all of this. The propaganda state is, according to Caitlin Johnstone, is 100 years old. They've been doing research on people for years and years and years now. All of these companies are heavily subsidized. Facebook, Bezos and his people, obviously he's got CIA contract and everything. All of those companies, Google, everyone is subsidized by the US government, and that's one of the reasons that the propaganda is working. And the Democrats, I'm not a Democrat, believe me, but the Democrats are doing their own marketing / propaganda, and that's, I think, a large reason why this whole Russiagate thing is happening. I can't quite figure out all the little details of what's true or not true, though. That's the only problem. Excuse me.
well, this
That's
is
our
an
problem.
ideal atmosphere into
I
which to
know,
inject
I
this
know.
kind of propaganda, because frankly,
It works.
We had Trump for president.
I
I think
know.
everybody was kind of, even if, you hated Hillary Clinton, we had Trump for president. It was kind of a horror story right in front of us, and this was our government, and it kind of left lots of people open to believing this stuff.
Don't you think that Hillary Clinton would have done some rotten stuff too? Like,
Of course.
Of
The thing is
course.
that I wanted to make the comment that I've heard people say if elections really mattered, we wouldn't be allowed to vote.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
Nobody
the
wants
thing
to
is
argue.
that the way elections are run is just stupid.
Yeah.
It is. It's mind-boggling to me.
Well, I was just gonna say something, a good thing to put in perspective, because I think it is important that, yes, we are constantly being told these lies. They constantly try to manipulate us. We are learning to be better about informing ourselves and better about sharing information about the kind of crap they pull. But I still think the proportions of it are not very well understood. And I'm just going to tell a little anecdote that Neil deGrasse Tyson told. He says, if I'm walking down the street and I see a penny on the ground, I'm not going to pick it up. What can I do with a penny? I see a nickel, I'm not going to, a dime, even a dime, but a quarter. If I see a quarter, I'm going to bend down and pick it up, because I'm thinking, I could use a quarter for something. And he says, now, if I took a quarter to my total income for a year and match that up with Bill Gates, how much money has to be on the ground before he will bend over and pick it up? It's $125,000. He will walk by that because he can't think of anything to spend it on. So those kind of proportions are, unless you can think, you got a great scientist like that who can tell it to you enough that you hear it.
In a way you can understand.
Yeah, that you can get it. I think that's part of it. I'd like to go back to what Don said, though. He said, if Russia interfered, were they right to do it?
Was it
And I kind of, my take on it is, while the US government has been, not just the US government, but the capitalists have been interfering for years in other elections, not just Russia, but all over the world.
Britain.
I assume,
Like Pompeo said, well, we got mechanisms in place to make sure Jeremy Corbyn is not gonna be prime minister.
Right.
Then you go, what mechanisms?
And
Same
I
stuff they're
suppose
using
if
on
Russia
us.
is an intelligent country, it's doing the same thing. I
Yeah.
assume, we just don't know about
Yeah,
how much, but that's the way countries work.
yeah.
And I remember when Clinton was elected, and all of a sudden, these lobbyists were superstars. And then you find out those lobbyists they're working in Argentina, they're working in Brazil, that's just capitalism. That's
Right.
not called interference.
Yes. Yeah.
That's just capitalism. I'm just doing my capitalist service to this other country. So it doesn't even have to be a government-run conspiracy. It can be just a Shell Oil conspiracy and
Right.
stuff. So I'm kind of to the thing where I'm like Kathleen. I don't think the elections are fair, and I also assume everybody's doing nefarious things.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to get back to what you were saying about, so you're nostalgia, you have kind of a nostalgia for the time when governments would talk to each other and negotiate things. And I'm wondering, can we ever go back to that? It's because of all this,
I don't think we
corporate
can.
interference, because of all this,
I don't,
whatever
I'm
manipulation.
afraid.
I think it's gonna, if we have, it's gonna be us. It's gonna be us activists that are gonna make the difference. It's not gonna be, Hillary Clinton or Trump. It's gonna be us forcing them to actually grow up and realize, and which means we have to get a lot stronger than we happen to be right now. But it can happen. It can happen.
It happened to Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
12 days.
Yep,
Yeah.
12
days.
wearing my Puerto Rico shirt.
right.
Puerto Rico.
Because they had these emails that exposed what they really thought, which was the same sort of thing with exposing what the Democratic National Committee really thought. I was glad to find out what they was doing on the inside. And now when the Democrats refer to it, they have 2 or 3 levels of generalization about something about Democratic plans or do whatever they're doing, but it wasn't plans, but just, they should have been, it was good to know about that because it was so some of this stuff, and WikiLeaks was doing it, some of these things we should find out about. And so sometimes it's a benefit.
Which is why
You're a little mixed up there, Don. You weren't informed by those emails. You were attacked. You were attacked.
Don't forget about Mother Nature. The oceans are rising.
Yeah.
Mar-a-Lago refugees are gonna be coming out. Mother Nature doesn't forgive, and,
She doesn't even judge.
yeah, no, and, all these coastal areas are very endangered, and, people there's younger generations who care more than some of the older generations, and they're gonna have to find solutions for survival.
Yes.
Speaking of that, did anybody watch the video that Mary B sent around? It was, Graham Elroy is a comedian, and he was showing a video that was playing, I can't think of the guy's name on RT, but it was Putin, and the stuff basically was showing that Putin was saying he wanted to negotiate, that the nukes were more important than climate change. That was his thing. She sent that around just the other, yesterday or the day before. Huh?
Was it the
Oh yeah,
political
political vigilante, yeah, hashtag political, I
and
think, yes.
I forget the name of the commentator that was
Yeah,
commenting.
Sanchez?
Well, Tulsi Gabbard too said nukes were the biggest danger.
Yeah, good,
Good for her.
Well, if we want to get it back to Putin, you know, I don't think he has much concern about all this, what's going on. He just wants to sell oil. He hasn't taken any forward stand. So I would say that's a big minus, in my opinion, that he is just wanting to sell oil to the world. I mean, that's what they depend upon. But, you know, I think about all these Catholics, I don't think they really care. I mean, a lot of them are really happy. We're gonna have ships that can go over the top. And they're gonna save so much time.
No, we're gonna find more
So-
oil, because it'll be exposed.
And not only that, but you can go all the way to Japan and China. So, you know, so there's just, you know, you just think that they're sleepwalking through it. So Putin, it does have some bad things against him. I guess I will believe some of the news accounts that he doesn't allow the people to vote in this recent Moscow election, and that he keeps pretty tight control on it, and that so that he doesn't have those kind of bona fides as to how any kind of a society should work. But saying that, but then if we want to go to the Ukraine, which is a continuous thing, I can see perfectly well why he would want to go into the Ukraine.
The port.
The biggest thing is that port, Sebastopol. And what was the U.S. was doing, they were spending $5 billion to change the government there, so that they could change the political allegiance away from being Russia-oriented. And at a certain point there, when that was developing, Russia said, well, as long as they would trade both Europe and Russia, they'd be fine with it. So, but as there was that famous phone call that was intercepted by one of the deputy secretary of state for Eastern Europe, Victoria Nuland, wife of another.
Who's the wife of Kagan, who's also some.
Yeah, I know, and he writes editorials all the time in the New York Times. Yeah, I got an article of Victoria Nuland can't keep her Steele story straight. She kept making mistakes in testimony about what she knew and didn't know, and when she knew it and when she didn't know it on that Christopher Steele Democratic report, the P-tape and all that stuff. I guess since she's apparently out of government now, she doesn't think she has to remember, and she keeps tripping over her lies. But, yeah, it seems for us, though, in terms of even Russia and propaganda, our immediate problem, yes, we have to worry about, obviously, the big pictures, like nuclear war, the fact that oligarchs don't seem to give a damn about anything but keeping the oil market going, no matter what's happening to the planet. Is this our media that give us the news? How do you get news anywhere that you can believe? You know, I mean, sure, we all have our places that we go to, but they're probably feeding what we believe too, you know, because they believe it. And, you know, you can't, I mean, I feel like I can't watch the news anywhere on television because I can't be sure any of it's true. Even the videos, they might have been doctored, you know? And then they do these stupid stories anyway, these filler stories, you know, and they do over and over again. The woman rescued in Hawaii got lost in the mountains. I got so sick of seeing that, you know? But real news, what do we do about our media, and how do we make our media serve our needs? Yeah, giving us news that we can possibly believe is true. And is that impossible because of the ownership problem and monopolization?
Commercialization, corporatism.
Yeah.
War, profiting.
Yes, all of it. These people are making money off war and manufacturing of weapons while delivering the propaganda that tells us we have to do this. You know, it's just awful.
I'm learning a lot tonight, but one thing is, I feel that Trump really represents us. He is what we are and who we are. And when I look around our country and talk with people, I'm beginning to have that sense. But one thing I want to say is that my former husband was raised in Germany, and at 15 he was carrying a gun on the Russian front. And the only way they got their news was the underground news. And do we have the underground here? And if we do, I would like to know.
Where is it?
Where it is, because I agree we can't depend upon the media. And that's how they passed the news in Germany, was underground.
You know, something that was a shock to me was to listen to Vladimir Putin at meetings at the Valdai conference and when he spoke at the UN, and also his State of the Union addresses. And it's just shocking, the difference between him talking to people and what we hear. Because to me, he's extremely frank. And Don, he is concerned about nuclear war. Like 3 or 4 years ago, he would call the United States, what did he call? Well, first we were our friends, the United States. We need to work together for the 2 major threats were global warming and terrorism, international terrorism, which he said is far different now than individual terrorists, because they're an international movement. They had access to money, big money. They have access to land. They had their own country, part of Syria. And Russia is really worried about terrorism. Now he doesn't. Then he called us our partners, our partner, the United States. Now he doesn't anymore. In our country, we call him our adversary.
Right.
But he spends a great, for instance, his State of the Union address is long. It's like maybe 2 hours. He takes questions from all kinds of journalists, even hostile Ukrainian and US journalists. And he's quite open about what he sees the problems are. We never, I think one of the reasons that we are brainwashed is because we're not allowed to hear what he says. And frankly, well, I wish we had a leader like that.
Wait, Mike?
Is it Linda?
Kristen?
Linda, it reminds me, Vladimir Putin actually had an editorial published in the New York Times, I think it was 2014. It was around the time that he negotiated the surrender of Syria's chemical weapons. But I found myself nodding along as I read that editorial. It was very recent. He talked about strengthening the United Nations. He talked about respecting other countries' sovereignty. And I was in agreement with
and
almost
he
all of it.
says every country has their national interests. And you have to acknowledge that.
Right.
Of course, he's got a major complaint that the United States went back on its promise to Yeltsin that they would not expand on the NATO borders to Russia. They would hold back. This is after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, the counter defense pact to NATO. And I think Bush 1 told Yeltsin that they would not be expanding because basically the Cold War was over with.
To Gorbachev.
No, Gorbachev.
It was to Gorbachev.
Was it Gorbachev or was it Yeltsin?
HW said to Gorbachev,
Oh,
we
okay, I
won't do
don't know where the
this.
timeline was in there, but there was this promise, and now they're up to 28 countries in NATO, right up to the border.
Well,
Thatcher
remember,
told
Wait a
him
second,
that,
Carla had a
Mitterrand
comment.
told him that.
I have 2 comments. One is, I think we have sources of news that we never dreamed of when there were underground newspapers. The internet is, of course, it's the dark state has a big interest in it and wants to control it. But if it weren't for Facebook, I would not be aware of a whole ton of stuff. It is so valuable. You can subscribe to feeds from all over the world, and you can even,
Yes.
the internet will translate them for you. Telesur, that is that tells you the truth. in my opinion. Someone mentioned Aaron Mate tonight.
Uh-huh.
There's any number
Right.
of shows that are on
Right.
YouTube that you
Jacobin.
can watch. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not already looking to the internet to get some of this information, you can read the New York Times there too.
You're at a huge disadvantage if you
Although
don't
they
use
are
the internet.
Yeah,
Press
but the other
stuff,
thing I
too.
wanted to,
Oh, yeah,
I
I
wanted
read
to
the New York
say,
Times, but I've been reading Noam Chomsky on the New York Times since the 1980s. I subscribed to a magazine called Loot, which was Lies of Our Times, put out by Robert Perry. Noam Chomsky wrote for it and said, start in the back,
Yeah.
and read forward if you want to know the truth. But yeah, remember Oliver Stone had that long documentary
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
with, and he got more trashed by mainstream media than I think he did for JFK, and they hated him for that. And-
Carla wasn't quite done though. She had
Oh,
one more
sorry.
thing to
okay,
say.
one more point. I don't think Putin's character is probably, something we have to figure out. But remember, he grew up and was nurtured in a socialist society. A kind of messed up one in a lot of ways. But that's a totally different way of acquiring a worldview than somebody who grows up in the capitalist world, So I think that affected him. I think he's not nearly as demonic as all of our politicians.
Right.
Undoubtedly
Maybe.
self-interest and all kinds of things influence him, but don't forget, we used to actually have another world power
Yeah.
that challenged us. That's gone.
Before the rape of Russia, I understand that there was no unemployment
Yeah.
in Russia. And there were subsidies for, education and healthcare. I mean, actually, the Russians had it pretty good.
Especially from where they came from. I mean, they
Mhm.
created in like 20 years' time something that took us, a century to create.
Through the Depression.
Yeah, I mean, and it was,
And all those people killed in World War II.
Yeah, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, 27 million.
27.
Um,
But the US won the war, I'm sorry.
Russia didn't do anything.
Speaking of socialism, Ralph Naderauer kind of defined it differently. We had a guest down. There's democratic socialism, but I think there's also big money Democrats too, and then the more progressive socialists. But there's Republican socialism that gives to the rich. Jeff Bezos, no taxes for you.
Right.
Richest man in the world. They're kind of taking from us,
Right.
wage theft and everything else, and cheating. So if you, like, people who are attacking socialism all the time, just say, well, what about the Republican socialism? Right?
Good point. Really good point.
That's
I
a
wish we
democratic
had a
socialist.
truly
too.
socialist government.
Oh,
Socialist
the rich,
world.
they're big money, yeah,
That's what we're working for.
yeah, big money Democrats.
How successful
That's
are we
all
gonna
we've
be?
had.
Oh,
Well, now we have some progressives that are under attack.
Well,
The
now I
squad.
hear the
The
new thing
squad.
is that Russia not
You
only
know-
supported Trump, they supported Bernie Sanders too.
yeah.
That might be a new thing.
Oh, really?
So the Russians supported
Yeah, I saw it on Democratic Underground and people commented and they said, okay, we can't go too far. But I thought, this is the next one.
That's so reminiscent of the civil rights movement, though. It was the communists were infiltrating, the people in
Yeah,
the South
yeah.
said, there is no problem here. It's the communist agitators.
Right, that's true.
And there were communists involved. That was one of the good things.
You meet him and you go, oh, these are nice people.
Yeah, that's still a decent attack they can use. One of the things that I was pretty sure that Trump was gonna win. Because what I think he appealed to was, Obama was a really slick guy. He was very good as a performer, very good, and people realized they didn't get anything from him. And I think the idea that some bumbling idiot would be better than this, intelligent, articulate, well-dressed, thin, activist, that people, we're so sick of politicians. And they should be, because politicians have not been good to them. That's a good thing. They said, well, let's just fuck it, let's just let this guy take over and see what happens. And it felt like fighting back. I think for some people, it felt like I'm fighting back against these rich politicians and some sort of twisted thing that even though Trump is rich and a politician, he's not like them.
He's not a
Well, he
politician.
wasn't
He's
a
not a
politician.
He's a racist.
He was a showman, I think. And a billionaire.
He basically runs his administration like
Yeah.
The Apprentice. But, yeah, and in reference to
Which was
the
a shitty
diminished
show, too,
African,
that was
right,
popular.
American population voting, there were interviews and they said, look, we voted for Obama for obvious reasons, for symbolic reasons, it was important to us. But we didn't get anything from him.
That's
So why would we think Hillary Clinton is gonna give us anything? So they didn't vote.
I think that's true
Do
too.
they ever really give us anything?
Yeah.
I don't know if these statistics are, well, I think they're fairly accurate, but I was sort of shocked when I read them. They said something like there were 258 million eligible voters in the United States, and 27.3% of eligible voters voted for Trump, and 27.8% of eligible voters voted for Clinton.
Wow.
And when they say, well, she got 3 million more votes, out of 256 or 258 million people, that's not real impressive.
So the
That's
no
just
vote, the not voting
no
was
vote-
by
no
far
vote
the
was the
winner.
majority.
Yeah, that's just
Wow.
over 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was just that tiny percentage difference.
What else is on that sheet?
Well, does Russia have imperial ambitions?
Does it have what?
Imperial ambition.
No,
No, sure
That's
they
it.
do.
They probably
there's
will.
no indication it does.
Not yet.
I mean, if we're gonna talk about how you do it with bases in other countries and all that,
There
I
are-
think we
Russia
win.
suppress people.
Huh?
They suppress people too.
Yes, yeah.
I met a Russian up in Canada and I was talking about Edward Snowden and he said, well, he didn't pick a very good country. And I said, well, he didn't have many choices.
Right.
Edward,
Right.
Oh, I think,
Snowden.
Russia's got the capitalist
They're
need to
capitalist,
sell their oil
Yeah.
and to get their
Capitalist country,
pipelines into certain countries, and I mean, if installing a puppet government in wherever, they would do it, I would think. I don't have any reason to believe they wouldn't.
Well, I think they played a pretty positive role at this point internationally. Certainly what they've done in Syria is a positive
Yeah.
kind of thing, and Venezuela is a positive kind of thing. And where else have they been? They have very few bases. How many?
3?
Yeah, something like
The
that,
United
compared
States
to
is
our,
only-
800.
huh?
800.
US.
800.
Our 800 compared to their 3. Yeah.
One place where Russia is alleged to have been an aggressor is in Georgia in 2008. And what you never hear
Yeah.
reported in the media is that there was a European investigation into that conflict. It was conducted by the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And the head of that investigation was a Swiss diplomat. Her name was Heidi Tagliavini. And they found that Georgia was the aggressor in that conflict, and that there was no justification under international law for the Georgian shelling of the Ossetian capital, the South Ossetian capital. But you never hear that. And it was like a 5-day conflict where Russia drove the Georgian army away from South Ossetia and then withdrew. I mean, they could have marched all the way and overthrown Georgia very easily, and they probably could have done it in Ukraine too in 2014, but by my estimation, they used restraint in Ukraine as well as in Georgia.
it was the US that overthrew the democratically elected government in Ukraine
Correct.
and put in a literal Nazi. A literal Nazi.
Yeah.
And then Crimea, that was predominantly Russian culture and language, those people were worried that Ukraine was going to attack them, and that's what led to the, the referendum. They had a referendum. It wasn't that Russians came in and captured Crimea.
But you don't get
that's
that.
another
But you don't hear
disinformation
that in the
campaign.
American media, they talk about it almost
Right.
like that's what they did. Not that the people of Crimea had a reason to vote to stay with Russia,
Right.
which apparently is what really happened.
And it had actually literally been part of Russia not
Yes.
very long before.
The late Bill Perry was big on pushing that storyline about the Ukraine.
You mean Bob Perry?
Robert Perry.
Robert Perry,
Yeah, Bob
Robert Perry, yeah, who died last year,
Yeah.
and,
You get a lot of this stuff on consortium. You can
Consortium.
go there, you can decide, but it's a different point of view completely than mainstream media. And it's American, former intelligence officials.
Called Consortium?
Consortium News.
That's Robert Perry's,
yeah, he.
Yeah.
his son
Still-
now.
I've been, he's the one that started with that thing that Reagan stole the election, that he sent Bob Casey and George Bush over to France to negotiate with Iran, which became the Iran-Contra scandal, to not release the hostages. And he pushed that story. He was a Newsweek reporter, and he eventually kind of was outside mainstream
So
media after that.
The answer to the second question is not yet, or no, not at this time, right? Are they an imperial power? Not at this time.
In 1968, I got to Prague 5 hours before the Soviets did.
You got to what?
Prague,
Prague.
Czechoslovakia,
Oh.
before the Soviets did. And I checked in at the university dormitories, because it was summer. And when I woke up, I'd never been to a communist country, and my father was big John Birch Society, anti-communist as you could get. And there were all these people in the lobby, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. And I went out to the street, and I saw people lined up at stores, and I thought, wow, that's true, they have to line up at the store. And then I turned down the street, and I saw a couple of tanks, and a guy waving the Czech flag with blood on it, and I
Oh, geez.
had this sinking feeling. And finally found a British person, and he said, well, you should go to your embassy because they've invaded. And I went to the U.S. Embassy, I found it, and they were running around like chickens with their head cut off, I'm sure, shredding every bit of spine evidence. And they were not helpful.
Well, you know, there is, it's illegal to own this book in the United States, but
It's
when
illegal
the.
to what?
It's illegal to own this book in the United States when the students took over the embassy in Tehran. They were in the middle of shredding the documents, like
Yeah.
you say.
Oh, yeah, they were putting
They
them back
collected
together.
all of that shredded material,
Yeah.
and women have been putting the shredded materials
Oh my
together
God.
for years. And
Yes.
every 20 years, they put out more volumes of the reconstituted
Wow.
CIA documents that are illegal to own or have in the United States. But they're produced, you can buy them in Canada.
Oh.
But yeah, they do it like, they've been doing it every 20 years since the embassy takeover.
How many have been put out? Well,
Huh?
I guess since the 80s, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Medea said she was gonna try and find them the next time she went over there and see if
Yeah.
she could get them back. But,
Could mail them maybe and,
yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, they were somewhat restrained, but they were picking up
I
people,
can't go.
I suppose professors, journalists, and taking them off in trucks. We didn't know what was happening. And
Wow.
How long did you stay?
I stayed for like 4 days, well, even though they told me get out right away.
How old were you then, Mary?
Huh?
How old were you then?
Oh, I was early 20s.
Oh, okay.
And we talk at the university dormitories, you know, like people, you know, because there were other foreigners, you know, what do we do? But, you know, looking eye to eye at these soldiers, you know, these communists, the people that we were so afraid of. They were young people. The worst that happened to me was they took my film out of my camera and exposed it. And I picked up some pieces of shrapnel and Molotov cocktail. You know, there were some bullets in that.
Put it in
And then
your
I
TSA
went
bag?
to East Germany and was sitting on the East German side by the wall, arguing with these people that the Russians shouldn't be doing this, but it was quite an educating
Yeah.
experience.
Well, there's a quote, the US is the greatest threat to the world today,
Yes.
and that was by Martin Luther King.
Still true.
And
Very true.
a lot of people think that actually that's the reason why he was assassinated, more than the civil rights activities.
Vietnam
But
War.
And his
when he
Vietnam
started
War,
becoming
yeah.
And the
aware
union
that the
workers.
US, you know, the US imperial role in the world, and
Plus you
started,
started talking about
he
redistribution.
started talking about it and objecting to it. So, I mean, okay, the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia, but the US has invaded literally dozens of countries. Yeah, I mean, there are only 193 countries, but you
Well,
start
some of
naming
them
the
it's been
countries.
4 times. I mean,
Many times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, most Americans have they might realize that the US is doing some things, but the enormity of the evil empire
Yeah,
that
but
we are,
We're
it's just,
exceptional.
we are, it's true, the US is exceptionally evil, and it's, I mean, who is gonna stop the US from its worldwide rampage?
Yeah.
well, the
Russia
rest
and
of them
China
are.
together,
Yeah,
maybe,
that's right.
huh?
And India,
Yeah,
it's,
I don't know.
The empire
Yeah,
is
the empire is
crashing.
declining.
That finally.
We're overspent, we're
Our
in
young,
debt.
Yeah.
our young.
Our day
Our
is
youth.
coming to
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our day is coming.
It just can't come fast enough.
Well,
And
no,
we're
that's the
ready for it.
problem, possible nuclear war,
Well, that's-
besides
Yeah.
catastrophic climate change tipping point.
I mean, if it's true that this demonization of Russia is to prepare the public for war
I
against
think it is.
Russia, and maybe a nuclear first strike by the US, I
Well,
mean, this would be catastrophic.
well, that's what a lot of these
It's
people
not-
who write for consortiums suspect, that there are people that have convinced themselves in the government that we can survive
Oh,
a
you know,
nuclear war,
Yeah, there's a
even
lot
if
of
they
things
kill a
that
bunch
should
of
be
us.
done.
Well, they have
They
some
can survive.
caves in
Yeah,
Virginia.
of course, they have places to survive, yeah, they're talking about
And they got
themselves,
30
you're
years
right.
supply of.
But why would
food
the
and
US do it?
everything.
I mean,
I know, it's crazy, I don't
It's,
understand
yeah,
it,
it's
you
just
know?
such a crazy
We're
idea.
living in fear.
Power begets power.
Well, the other reason they could be keeping the idea of war on the horizon in enemies is the old-fashioned US war budget, the Defense Department, which grows. There's an article recently in the Harper's by Patrick Holbrook.
Oh, yeah, I haven't read that yet.
Every year it goes up by 5%, every year, no matter
one more
what's
than
going on. It goes back a little bit, but then it catches up with it. So it's a totally unnecessary, unless, I mean, I feel that the US got out of the 1930s depression by preparing for World War II. The same way Nazi Germany got out of the depression, preparing for war. And now the US decided, you know, ever since the Second World War, that they had to have a continual, permanent war machine. And it's such a profitable thing for these companies, these corporations. And so you just have to, you know, rev up people a little bit. Oh yes, I want to be protected. So they'll go do it, and there's not much that can be done about it. I mean, you saw just recently where they're going to, the House of Representatives last week voted for a big increase, even though it's Democrat. But they're going to do that to avoid all the other headaches of having a governmental shutdown, a big hassle over the debt limit, and so that there would be also an increase in domestic spending, which would be more for people. But it's, so they just, the factors that continue, push it forward, continue to do it. And so whether, most of the military, I think, feel that China is the biggest threat.
That's our real enemy.
I also remember what, I'm trying to think of his name, Ellsberg said. They said, well, if we're gonna destroy Russia, we'll just do China too. I mean, that was their plan when he was working for the government and planning how to use the weapons. They said, well, just as long as we're doing that, yeah, let's get China too, you know. I mean, that's the logic these people have.
Yeah, if anyone should want to get a real scary, his Ellsberg's book last year, Doomsday Machine.
Yeah, that's it.
Like the drift from nuking Russia, the drift of the nuclear cloud would have killed most of Western Europe. And then the nuclear winter thing. There was just frightening attitudes on the part of military planners, you know. Yeah.
They
But
think
you
it's
know,
worth it.
people, the good news is people really have to be propagandized to go to war. Most people, when this stuff starts, are opposed to it, but then, you know, it's full stop, so that now, I think people probably do go along with doing something to Venezuela. I don't know what those polls look like, but.
It's scary how easy
yeah.
it is, though, to
But
get the public to go along
Yeah.
with something.
It's
But
an
it isn't easy. It
executive
isn't easy. I mean,
decision.
I
The
think-
people don't have anything. Congress isn't doing their job.
I hear so much
Declaring war.
propaganda about it on national
It's
public
the
radio.
president.
You say mainstream
declaring
media, we
war.
should say lamestream media.
Unfortunately.
Well, the CIA plant stories,
Yeah.
you know, the links between the CIA and the news media
Right,
are much greater than most people realize.
right.
And, see, William Casey was said to have said, our disinformation campaign will be successful, we'll judge that it's successful when the American public believes, everything the American public believes is false.
Yeah.
That was the goal of the CIA.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was admitting to this huge disinformation campaign, and yet people still read the New York Times and the Washington Post. I don't get it.
And listen to NPR.
Yeah.
I know.
NPR, yes, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
yes.
I know, it's frightening. Even Pompeo said when he was, when he
I lied.
head of the
I
CIA, all I did was lie.
Lied and cheated and.
Yeah, one other thing.
Yeah.
Stole.
We
yeah.
lied, we cheated, we stole.
Well, we've solved the issue of Russia now, I think, after this
Do we,
discussion.
is there another one there? Another good one?
Well, I don't know what we could say about the downing of the Malaysian plane.
Yeah, I
Or the
didn't-
Steele dossier, do you have something about the Steele dossier that some?
Oh, it was just that Victoria Nuland thing. I mean, and Aaron Mate was saying today that he, you know, that Steele, you know, he worked for the British government and he didn't even get contacts in Russia that he had had when he worked for, is it MI6 or 5, and he was there in Russia. They think he had even more secondhand information, that people actually got some of their allegations that they fed to him because he was giving them so much money, which at that time was coming from the Democratic Party.
Well, actually, the Steele dossier was initially funded by Peter Singer,
Right, yes,
who did
initially.
Initially, and then when he, a Republican strategist who hated Trump back in 2016, and he wanted to get the goods on Trump, and he hired Christopher Steele to do the
Fusion
dirt digging,
GPS.
Fusion
Hired,
GPS. So but then he saw that it was winding down and that Trump was going to get the nomination. He gave up on it, and then, as I understand it, the Hillary campaign.
Then they took it up.
They took
Yeah,
it
that's
up.
how it happened. So they'll say, no, it was Republicans. Well, it wasn't when the Steele dossier actually came out. And they were just reading things in the newspaper and then feeding it to them. Yeah, that's how bad it was, you know. It's not pro-Trump or anti-Trump, it was just making money.
What are we gonna do?
What are we gonna do?
It did come up in the hearings though, the Steele dossier.
Oh,
The-
yeah, I always get mad when they say, you know, Clinton campaign was started by Singer, by a Republican, although
Yeah, nobody says that anymore.
Clinton is so corrupt, you know, their campaign didn't hesitate to pick up the mantle after Singer backed away from it.
Well, the one thing that I have never seen, and I may, I don't read everything, but I've never seen Hillary say anything other about the election, other about how it affected herself.
She wrote
She
that
has,
book.
she has never
Yeah, I
talked
didn't
about
read
the
What
people
happened.
who've been
Yeah.
hurt by it. She's never talked about the way it affected the working class, the way, it affected, tax cuts. She's never talked about, whatever good could have come and that people would have benefited by her democratic plans. She hasn't talked about those people. She's just talked about herself.
It was always about herself.
Yeah.
Good neoliberal. Well, here we could end up on this. Here's the last thing on this ideas here. What should the U.S. relationship with Russia look like?
The US should treat Russia with respect and, like we would like to be treated.
As a part of the nuclear freeze thing, I think that gave birth to the Sister City movement.
Mm-hmm.
And in La Crosse, our sister city was another brewery town approximately the same size as that was Highlands on a big river. And so our sister city was Dubna. And then we had, I was a county nurse and we had exchanges.
Yeah.
Home care nurses from the Soviet Union came home. It was, music teachers were exchanged. It was quite a remarkable, and the Physicians for Social Responsibility
Yeah, they were
got
good.
involved.
Well, Kathleen Torture is finally has got this website up, and we're gonna do a people-to-people thing and try to keep political opinions out of it with the Iranians. Ordinary Iranians take pictures, ordinary Americans take pictures and said, my name is, and something simple like, I wanna be your friend, or I see you as a human being.
Yeah.
And it's based on a Soviet Union American people-to-people project. And we looked at old photos of just average Soviets holding their kids in a group with some friends saying, hi, I live in so-and-so Russia or Soviet Union, and I'd like to introduce myself to you. And then Americans would do the same thing back in an effort to just have ordinary people see other ordinary people in the other country that was supposedly our enemy. This is who you kill.
Yeah,
You
it was
know.
just shocking to me
Yeah.
how they looked just like us.
Yeah.
They were dressed like us, I thought, they'd be poor and.
Right.
No, they just were ordinary people.
And this one nurse, I remember, she was talking to our the county home care nurses, and there they were assigned one of those big, huge apartment buildings. Each nurse had her own apartment building, and she carried her bag and an EKG machine. And she said, all necessary paperwork. And it was just delightful, the questions we asked about what they did for these different problems.
Yeah.
But her sense of humor was, it was something that we could share.
Right. Well, I think every country has things that they're very good at, and if we could just exchange those things,
We have the space station, there's sharing going on there.
Yeah.
I know, I
That's gone
read a
on
comment
for
today
decades, yeah.
about this, the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and say what is left out of this discussion is what all the Soviet space shots did and all the information
Prior to
they
us.
got. That nobody can give them any credit for
Any
anything.
credit,
It's
right.
not allowed.
Yeah.
Well, when Sputnik was put out, Kennedy wanted to make sure that we
Right.
tried to
I
get
mean, they
ahead of
went
them in
from
the space race.
royalty.
Yeah.
They went from royalty
Tsarina and Tsar. Yeah.
to,
We've got-
And the U.S. did invade at the end of World War II. We went in
7 or
from
8
Europe,
times,
to Siberia, and occupied it for a little bit till the lead commander, American commander, said, "What are we doing here?"
yeah, I mean, I'm sure we have much to share with each other.
We brew pretty good beer these days.
There you go.
Yeah.
We could teach them all about lefse and ludicrous.
Do you know where the WHAM signups are?
Oh,
On board.
I'll grab it.
Right here, you sign this one
No,
first, because I don't think you've done
I
this
brought
one.
it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, she's got that, we're gonna get you
Yeah.
up. Here's, this is what you were
The
looking
nuclear
for.
weapons. And I brought you.
Well, thank you all. Take a cupcake if there are any left.
This was the beginning of
And
our
thank you for coming.
Most recent nuclear ban.
So how did it go, after the
So
election?
this is a list.
Whatever happened with the
Was it-
Malaysian thing? What
We,
did they-
well, fortunately, we got a
Oh, I
lot
think
of
the